Hi, today we're going to talk about the litigation process. And first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Joe Shannon. I own a law firm called Shannon Law Group. We've been representing folks that have been badly injured or harmed for the last 17 years. Before that, I represented insurance companies and large companies for about 8 years. That was critical to my development as a lawyer because I learned how insurance companies think about these things, how they think about insurance coverage for large losses, how they attack them, how they defend them, how they make sure that a plaintiff does not recover what he's entitled to. When I started becoming a lawyer for people that are injured about 28 years ago, I was able to use those skills to determine what kind of cases I need to put together. And there's nothing wrong with representing an insurance company or larger companies. In fact, I did that for 8 years, and I learned a ton, and I recommend that for a lot of lawyers coming out of law school because you learn from top-notch professionals how to be a lawyer. However, I've really enjoyed representing regular people that are in really bad circumstances that need us. And so what I really want to go through right now is the process of what happens. Something really bad happens. A semi-trailer injures or kills people on the expressway. It happens a lot in Illinois, happens all throughout the United States. What I wanted to talk to you was the process of what happens right when the incident happens. Typically, when I'm called, there's already been a bad event. I'm getting called from a relative who has their loved one in a hospital. Usually this is within a week of the crash happening. We've handled these type of cases all the time, so we know exactly what's going on. What's happening is the injured person is about a week behind because the insurance company or the self-insured company, the trucking company, has already sent out an investigator, an insurance adjuster, a number of different people, depending on how big the crash is, maybe even experts, to explain exactly what happened. And there's a lot of information that is there that needs to be found immediately. What is that? There's got to be an interview of all the witnesses. Usually people's memories fade with time. At that moment, when I'm getting the call, the thing I'm thinking about is the end. And the end in my business is a jury trial. So I'm going to take you through the process of what it is from the time that you get a case until you get to trial. And the good lawyer will think about that right away. They've got to get to the scene, take a look at the scene, evaluate the scene, explain why this happened, get all the evidence. There's computer data inside of the truck. Sometimes there's a GoPro camera. Sometimes there's other evidence in the truck. There's evidence in the vehicles that were involved too, because most of the vehicles will have computers inside them that will tell you how fast the vehicle was going at the time of impact, how fast the vehicle was going when the person braked, if they braked at all, how fast the impact was, all these types of things. That stuff is there and it's got to be collected. Now, you're thinking, well, the police are going to do that. Well, for sure. The police are going to investigate what they're interested in. What the police are interested in is whether somebody gets a ticket, making sure that all of the vehicles get off the expressway so that traffic can keep going, whether everybody's sent to the hospitals, those types of things. They're not thinking about liability. They're not thinking about our justice system. Now, when I'm talking to you about these things, most of these issues are interesting for all of the different jurisdictions in the United States. However, we are a republic. So each state has its own rules. As I'm giving this explanation, this is for Illinois, but it can apply to different states as well. But you want to get to that scene right away. You want to get your investigator there. You want to get film of it. You want to get film of the injuries. You want to get film of the other vehicles. You want to put everything together so if you're going to have to hire an accident reconstruction person, they have the data to do it. Nowadays, there's cameras everywhere. So were there cameras in the area that actually took a video of the site of the scene at the time of the crash? That stuff is worth tons. And so sometimes those get erased. But you as a person, you for the loved one, your job is to get better. So all you need to be worrying about is following your doctor's orders, doing exactly what you need to do to get better, and then delegating the stress of the situation to a lawyer that has done this over and over and over again. That's what we do. We wrote a book on it. It's called Transportation Law. I put that together so that folks could read that. And in fact, if you want it, all you have to do is hit the tab below. We'll send it to you or text us at 312-847-2428, 312-847-2428. And then we will send you a free copy of my book, Transportation Law, which lays all of this out. So you've made a decision that you don't want to deal with the stress of dealing with the insurance companies or the trucking companies by yourself, which is a good move, and you intend to hire a lawyer. In Illinois, in order for you to hire a lawyer, you must retain them in a written fee agreement. So what we do is we explain that to folks. We have them review the written retainer agreement. Once they sign that agreement and hire us, what do? Well, we put the other side on notice to deal with us only, not contact you anymore. We get all your medical records and bills. We get all the investigators at the scene. We make sure we gain all the data we need for the trial, because a lot of it's there, and we need to get it as soon as possible. We send a letter to the other side saying, hey, do not what they call spoliate the evidence. Don't get rid of the computer data. Don't get rid of the GoPro video. Don't get rid of any of the log books. They're electronic now, but don't get rid of any of that stuff. Keep it. And so once they get that, they're required to hold that. And if they don't, down the road, it doesn't look good for them. Sometimes what we'll do in order to preserve the scene, preserve all the evidence, is we'll go to court immediately to get a protective order and have the court order that all that stuff is downloaded properly, is stored until the litigation's over with. And then what's next? Well, what we'll typically do is put together a complaint. Now, the complaint is basically lets the court know what exactly went on and why we believe that you should be entitled to compensation for the negligence, recklessness, intentional conduct, whatever it is that caused this. We've had a number of these over-the-road cases in which truckers fall asleep, in which they fix their books because they're driving too much and become drowsy. We've had cases in which they've been under the influence, all sorts of different things of why these happen. And typically there's a reason why these things happen. The folks weren't either the proper candidates, they weren't properly trained, they weren't properly retained in that they had dozens of moving violations, including being on their phone while driving a truck, not paying attention while driving over and over again, and yet still keeping the company keys. So we make sure we file a complaint. And in the complaint, we'll set forth everything that we need to. The next thing is making sure we have all the parties. So we want to make sure that we find out exactly who was responsible for this truck being on the road. And it isn't necessarily just only the truck driver and the company that he has. Typically, that's a small company. Sometimes it involves people that are making the money off of the trip and are controlling it. In Illinois, for example, if the defendant has the right to control the driver, in this case, or the company that was making the run, and was actually controlling, you have a chance to get those folks to pay for your injuries as well. After we file the complaint, the other side will file an answer, and then we'll be what they call at issue, which means we'll be able to work towards a trial. And we're not at trial yet. We're still gathering information. So what happens then is typically the plaintiff and his family members or her family members are interviewed in what they call a deposition. And they try and find out exactly what your life was like before the crash and after the crash and how this is impacted. After those depositions are all done, then the depositions of the defendant will go, including the driver. We'll take a look at the driver's personnel record. We'll take a look at all the training that they've done. We'll take the deposition of the person most knowledgeable at the trucking company, which includes the folks that trained them, retained them, to make sure that we understand exactly why this happened on this date. And usually there's an explanation. And that's what you want for your trial. You want to explain exactly why this happened. But the thing is, when somebody's driving a semi-tractor trailer and is carrying a full load, that is a heavy responsibility. And they should be all in on looking at the road ahead of them and making sure they have the proper stopping distance, etc. So there's a lot of training that goes into being a commercial professional driver. So after those depositions are taken, then there'll be depositions of all of the medical personnel. Typically, they want to know exactly what the injuries were, what the prognosis is for the future from the treaters. Now, a lot of these cases will have expert witnesses. So why would there be expert witnesses? Well, I'll tell you. So somebody that's been seriously injured, meaning traumatic brain injury, orthopedic injuries, all sorts of problems throughout their body, there are probably 20 different medical providers. It's a lot. There's radiologists, there's anesthesiologists, all these different people. So typically what we'll do is we'll have one or two expert witnesses, medical expert witnesses, take a look at all the records. And we typically will get somebody that has testified for both insurance companies and for regular people and has done this a lot, so they understand how to communicate to the judge and to the jury exactly what the injuries are. And not only that, is what the future is going to look like. Because that's the reason why you hire a lawyer. We'll hire experts for the medical. We'll hire experts on the economic. For example, the typical layman doesn't understand how to calculate how much somebody has lost. For example, somebody that's 30 years old and had a profession and was severely injured in a crash and can't do their job, they went to college for it. They worked for 8 years at the job. They're 30 years old. A semi hits them. They can no longer do their job because they have a traumatic brain injury. That needs somebody like an economist to evaluate what the devastation and loss is going to be to the family. So we typically hire that person to come and take a look at everything, the tax returns, interview the employer, interview the family, interview our client, take a look at what kind of jobs that person can do, and then come up with a number that will compensate that person. Now, let me be really clear here. There's never a number that's going to compensate somebody for the devastating losses that I've seen. There's not a number. But in our system, that's the way it works, is we try and put the person in the position they would have been prior to the loss. And so that's what we do. That's why we bring all the evidence. That's why we hire the experts. That's why we bring in the doctors. That's why we bring in the family to make sure that the jury understands what kind of loss we're dealing with. Now, other experts that we deal with include the experts on the trucking industry. There's folks that have run huge trucking companies. They know how to hire drivers, they know how to vet drivers, they know how to train drivers. They know when there's a drug testing need to be happening. They know all that stuff. And so that's a specific area that we'll hire on just so that the jury can understand exactly the way it should be when you hire this type of person. And so economists, liability experts, we may hire an accident reconstruction expert. We may also hire an expert that is an expert on interpreting the computer data from vehicles. And there's a number of other experts depending on the case. Sometimes you have to bring in folks that are psychologists because there's been a traumatic brain injury and there's been a neurological loss, and evaluating it. We've hired folks that deal with concussions and the extreme effect that can have on somebody for the rest of their life. Okay, now we've come to the point of we've ended discovery. The depositions have been taken of the plaintiff side, the defense side, doctors. We've taken the depositions of all the experts in the case, which we just discussed. Now it's time to set a trial date. And that is what you hire a trial lawyer for. You hire a trial lawyer to make sure that they can put all that information together in a nice, orderly fashion so that the judge and the jury can understand exactly what happened, why it happened, and what your injuries are, and what all that means. So what happens then? So we're approaching trial. we got to get ready. So what do we got to do? Well, we have to make sure all the witnesses are coming. So we subpoena all the witnesses. The witnesses are all coming in. I got to make sure that the defense witnesses are going to be there. So I send out what they call a 237, which says, please bring to court any and all witnesses that I depose that have information with respect to all these issues. We will make sure that we prepare our clients so that they're not as nervous as they're going to be nervous, right? So we want to make sure that they prepare. When you have a jury trial, the whole idea is that you're going to have a jury of your peers, which means you're going to be speaking to ordinary people that have your shared life experience. They may have kids too. They understand if it happened to them, if they were hurt, what would happen to them and their families and their kids, that type of thing. We want to make sure that we prepare them, but we also want them to just talk to the jury as well and let them know what happened. Through no fault of their own, they're sitting in traffic and a semi crashed into them at 70 miles an hour. This is their day in court. So prepare the plaintiff, and then all that stuff that we got early in the case, all of the videos, all of the photographs, all the witness statements, everything's together. We make sure that we want to bring a really thick briefcase full of all that stuff to the courthouse. Nowadays, a lot of it is put together in somewhat like a movie, in that, we videotaped a ton of the depositions. We've got videotape of a lot of the story. We may put together a day in the life video of your life, of what it's like before the crash and after the crash. We want to make sure that we communicate, and that's my number one fear, is that I don't communicate all of the injuries to the jury. So I want to make sure that we do that. So you get a little bit neurotic about it. You want to make sure you put everything into this case. We have all the evidence together. We file what they call motions in limine, which are basically both sides will file those, which will basically say, hey, judge, this evidence should come in for this reason. The other side will say that isn't relevant, that shouldn't come in. Those are called motions in limine. The judge decides all those issues before we pick a jury. So then we go through what they call voir dire, which is a big panel of people are in the courtroom, and then we get to interview them. And depending on what court you're in, if you're in federal court, there's very limited what they call voir dire. And in state court, typically we'll get a little more leeway to get to know the people a little bit better. Anyway, we'll pick a jury of 12 people. Now, what's important in Illinois to know is that in order to win a case, all 12 jurors must agree for you to win or to lose. There's no 10-2s or 11-1s or 6-6s, none of that. It's either 12-0 or nothing. So you have to convince 12 people that you're right. And then those same 12 people have to agree to the number of your damages. So we've got the jury picked. The judge swears them in. They swear to only listen to the evidence. You've probably seen it on TV, how it works. Once they're impaneled, and then it's the job of me, the plaintiff's attorney, to put the case on. And I give what they call an opening statement, which I set forth exactly what I believe will happen in the days ahead. What I try to do with jurors is to get it done as soon as possible, because these folks are serving the community by showing up. And my job is to make sure that they don't have to serve that long. They left their homes, they left their jobs, they left their children. They don't want to be there typically. Now, they want to be patriotic and serve their country, and it is part of the Constitution, and the Constitution comes alive when juries are impaneled. However, I'm very sensitive to that, in that, I have 6 kids. I know if my wife was impaneled, it'd be a big thing for her. So I try and make sure that I got my case streamlined. I videotape a lot of the testimony already. I make sure that a lot of it's visual. I make sure that we have them all lined up and there's no waiting around. I want to make sure that we get this justice done swiftly. We're trying to be very organized. We're not going to, shortcut it. We're basically going to do a voluminous type of undertaking, but we're going to do so in a very quick fashion for the judge and the jury, so that they see exactly why you should be entitled to damages. After we do that, we put all our evidence on. We'll put on the plaintiff, we'll put on other damage witnesses, including medical folks, our experts, etc. And then we'll rest, which means that we're done. putting on evidence for now. The defendant comes in and says, hey, this is why we should win. This person, although horrifically brain damaged and horrifically harmed, and et cetera, isn't hurt that bad. And they'll bring in some witness to say that. My job is to cross-examine them. The number one thing that we do is it's the search for truth. And so that's what cross-examination does. I will talk to the other witness and say, hey, listen, isn't it true that this person had an unbelievable job, was 30 years old, was able to support his family, and now he can do none of it? And the person answers yes. Then I'll say, well, then why can you say that he's only entitled to this much money? And so the jury will hear that, and they'll believe what the truth is. And so my job is to hire great experts that are the top-notch people and will give the truthful answers. Now, is any of this perfect? No. None of it's perfect. None of it's supposed to be perfect. It's the best we can do. Because again, money doesn't solve all the problems, but this is the way we do it in America. So the defense will put their case on. Then I'll be able to do what they call a rebuttal, which means if I think that the defense put on a case that was complete BS, and I want to put on something that totally says this is what they said was completely untrue. I've already done it in the beginning, but I may want to reiterate that. That's called rebuttal. I put on my rebuttal. And then after that's done, I rest. Then what we do is we go into closing arguments. Most movies, this is the biggest scene, right? The closing argument, all the evidence is in. We're talking about closing arguments. Now, let me tell you exactly what a person should be able to recover in Illinois if they have a permanent injury. We typically will put on what the medical bills incurred, where typically there's in the hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars, and then the future medical. And usually that's a lot of money. And then there's the wage loss issues and loss of earning capacity, which again, if it's a young professional like this, again, a lot of money. In Illinois, in most states, the case is mainly about what we call non-economic damages. In Illinois, those include pain and suffering. So let's talk about that. So pain and suffering is the amount of pain and suffering that the person endured from the date of the crash until the date of trial. And that's called, a present number. And then what it's going to be like in the future. That's where the experts come in. They're predicting what it's going to be like in the future. If the expert testifies they have a permanent disabling injury, then we're entitled to ask for future pain and suffering. When you think about it, if you're going through life every single day, and every single day, every step, it hurts. Every time you can't sleep at night, those types of things. That's what the case is about. We don't live to work, we work to live. So we do our job so we can spend time with our loved ones and our families. And when we can't do that, it's hard. And so that's what the pain and suffering is. The other component is this thing called loss of a normal life, which I think is probably the biggest component. The pain and suffering is awful, as well. But the loss of a normal life is, this person that we've been talking about, this 30-year-old professional, could support their family, was very proud of that, went to work, thrived at work, and now is at home, dependent on others, unable to support his family, feels the guilt of that, feels the burden of it, is taken care of, lost their independence. That's what the case is about. And that is what is needed to explain to a jury what exactly the case is about there. There's typically no amount of money that is going to compensate somebody for that. And so as a lawyer, it's my job to be prepared to ask for a lot of money for that, because in my world, being the father of 6 kids, I can't imagine being in that situation. But my job is to imagine it in a very real way and to be able to communicate that to a jury and how that's done. So that's the pain and suffering in the future and the loss of normal life in the future, and disfigurement. I forgot to add that one. That one's the last one. If there's any disfigurement, that's also a component. But the loss of normal life and pain and suffering are the largest component in these cases. And so that's why you have the thick briefcase. That's why it's important that you hire a lawyer that's able to communicate that. It's been my privilege to be able to do that for folks for a long time. And so I still enjoy doing it. I've got a great group of lawyers that help me out and staff, and they really like being able to make a difference in people's lives. And that's what we do. We make the closing arguments. The jury will get together, and then when we're done, we typically will go away, and then the judge will say, "I'll call you when they're done." So sometimes I've had juries out for 3 hours. I've had juries out for a day or two, because again, 12 people have to agree. So once that's done, you get their phone call, and the bailiff says, or the clerk says, "Come back here, they've got a verdict." The jury will read a verdict, and they'll read exactly what the finding is. And after that, the judge will enter what they call a judgment on the verdict. And once that judgment becomes entered, the defendant owes the money. And so my job is to make sure we collect it. And that's where the insurance coverage comes in. That's where the collection part comes in. And that's for a different video. But that's the process of a lawsuit in a nutshell.